So if you were wondering why are we learning all of this stuff about population biology, well, some of it is going to tie into when we talk specifically about human populations. So we're going to see this stuff come back for that. But also we'll see it when we talk about things like biodiversity. So we need to know this sort of information for doing conservation. So I want to talk a little bit about that right now. So conservation biology, what they're doing is going to have to figure out what the minimum population for any given population is for long-term survival. So if you're trying to protect, say, cheetahs, you need to know what the minimum population is in order to protect them in the long term. And you might be wondering, well, why? Why do we need to know the minimum population? The thing is that there is this problem called genetic drift. And you may have heard of this if you've taken a biology class when they talked about genetics. This is usually talked about with natural selection. Genetic drift is where you get a change in the gene pool in a population by chance. So let's say you've got a, population of, cheetahs. So I'm going to change the color of my pen here a couple of times. So each of these dots is a cheetah, right? And the colors stand for different versions of a gene in the population for, say, heat tolerance, right? So this allows them to stand it if it gets, too hot or too cold, whatever it might be. So these all are different versions of that gene. So let's say, the red one allows them to stand it when it's hotter. The blue one allows them to stand it when it's cooler, and so on. So this is a very genetically diverse population. But we need to know how genetically diverse a population is, because genetic drift can do something kind of nasty. Because genetic drift can come in and wipe out a population at random, like my eraser here, and remove all of the gene types of certain colors. All right, so now we're down to just a couple of colors. Oh, here's a green one. Now we have a much less diverse population, which means that they're much more susceptible to any sort of change in the environment. And that's the problem. When you've got a small population that doesn't have a lot of genetic diversity, it becomes an issue as far as if there's a change in climate, if there's a change in their food supply, because they're less likely to be able to adapt. So there's two ways that can happen. It's the same outcome either way, just happens different mechanisms. So there's the founder effect. That's where a group of organisms basically picks up and moves to another area. Or the bottleneck effect. This is where what you've got here, the bottle. So something happens like with my eraser to remove a significant part of the population. And so instead of having a nice mix of the genes, you have a very, basically homogeneous population with very little genetic variation. And so understanding how populations change and then understanding the genetic makeup of a population helps conservation biologists know what they need to figure out as far as okay, can we help save this population with the numbers that we have left? Because, for example, cheetahs right now are in a lot of trouble, not just because of the number of cheetahs that we have, but because they are so genetically similar to each other. Something happened, it wasn't human driven, but something happened in their environment that occurred with a genetic bottleneck that wiped out all but probably about 24 cheetahs several thousand years ago. And it was a huge climate change. We know that much. And now, because there were only about 24 of them, and we know this through genetic testing, they're so genetically similar to each other that if something changes in their environment, there's a good chance that they'll go extinct. And the thing is that with the grizzly bears that we have right now, the Yellowstone bear population is only about 600 bears, and we have only about 1,200 grizzlies left in the United States. So if we can't get that Yellowstone bear population at least to interact with the other bears, they're in trouble for having issues with genetic drift, with bottlenecks as well. So knowing this information about, how these populations will change, how they interact, is incredibly important, especially since a lot of these issues, especially things like founder effects, are caused by humans today, because things like our freeways and construction are actually creating founder effects by cutting off the connections between populations. Okay, that's the end of the population biology unit.